Welcome, everyone. We're starting chapter 20 today in St. Paul versus St. Peter. This chapter is Lord and Son of God. Last week was chapter 19, as Penny noted, was about the Gentile Christians' need for incarnation. But this week is about the Pauline's efforts to prove, that's quote unquote, prove that the incarnation had taken place. Now, for the Paulines, proving meant finding text in the Old Testament, because there wasn't a New Testament, there was only the Jewish Bible. So finding text in the Old Testament about God coming in the flesh. Now, I'm not a big proof texter, but that's what they wanted to do. So Goulder said there were 3 texts in Psalms, but he only talked about 2 that I ever found. So the 2 that he discusses are Psalm 110 and 2nd Psalms. And those 2 you can read on the screen there. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And the other is, I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son, today I've begotten you. Those are the 2 we'll discuss today, plus some others. So here's a picture of Jesus on the throne at the right hand of God, in case you ever wondered what they looked like. I suppose that's the Holy Spirit and the dove above them. I don't really see the enemies at his feet, but that's the best I could do.
What's in between the angels down there on the bottom?
I think those are the
people?
principalities and angels and all
Okay,
that.
we can call those the principalities and powers.
Yeah.
That's what you think.
They look like cherubim,
Yeah,
That's what I was.
They have
baby
wings.
angels.
okay. So the first verse, Psalm 110. Originally, in this verse, the Lord meant God, and my Lord meant the Israelite king David, and he was sitting on his throne in Jerusalem on the right side of the temple, according to the way Goulder had it pictured. But the Paulines, they did a kind of a switcheroo, and the Lord still means God, but my Lord was changed from King David to Jesus Christ, and now he is sitting on the throne in heaven instead of in Jerusalem, but in heaven on the right side of God. This is following his resurrection, according to Paul. So my Lord is given the highest honor he can be given by being on a throne next to God. So this is against the Petrine, telling the Petrines he's not an ordinary man possessed by a spirit, by the Christ Spirit. He's up there with God, right hand, kind of his right hand. So you couldn't get any higher than that, I guess. There are several places in the New Testament that allude to Psalm 110, and you can see these different little phrases out of that scripture. You can see in these different scriptures of the New Testament. In Corinthians, enemies and his feet are referred to. In Romans, the right hand. And in Ephesians, sit at his right hand. And then this one's almost a fully quote, in Hebrew, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. That's pretty much the whole psalm. So these are scriptures in the New Testament referring back to Psalm 110. And one more in Acts, and which they say, hey, they have David saying, well, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So in Mark 12, 35 to 37, they have Jesus asking this question, how can the scribes say, and there were scribes in the Petrine side of the church, say that the Messiah is the son of David? Because David said, the Lord said to my Lord. So how can David call him Lord if he's his son or his descendant anyway? So they were arguing that Jesus Christ must be a divine figure, not a human descendant. Which doesn't that seem like a little bit of a contradiction, since Paul said he had this dual descendancy, descended from David by the, how's that go? He's a descendant of David by the flesh, and he's a descendant by the Holy Spirit on the other side. So it's kind of, but it's still, Goulder argues that, the Paulines are arguing for him to be a divine figure, not a human descendant. So this must be a later Pauline evolution from the very first, don't you think?
Could be, but I think part of the point that they're making is that David did not ascend to heaven, which was described in the Psalm, and therefore that can't apply to David.
Right.
The reference to my Lord, sit at the right hand.
This one, Goulder said that eventually, let's see, wait a minute. I skipped one there. So we're arguing, the Paulines are arguing that Jesus is the divine figure. This is not referring to David because he couldn't refer to his son as his Lord. So,
and then later, they attributed David to writing the Psalms. So David wasn't talking about himself, right? Is that what Goulder is trying to argue? At least part of it.
he did.
I think there's some disagreement on which Psalms David actually wrote himself.
Yeah.
And that some were written by others or more common songs in the church. And so Goulder's making the case this particular psalm was written by David, therefore he can't refer to himself as. Plus
He didn't say I.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. He could only be referring to himself in the third person, I guess. Which
some people do.
some people do.
I don't know. Maybe that was a circular argument to me. But, another title was the Son of God. This one also was appealing to the Paulines. And you read the Old Testament, there are several places where Son of God is used. In one place, Hosea, I believe it is, Israel is referred to as God's son. And then I think Goulder says in some places, angels are called God's sons. But the one that you see the most significant one is when the king of Israel is called God's son. And this is the Psalm 2:7, second Psalm, 7th verse, where this promise is a promise God makes to David through Nathan, the prophet. And so when David was at the coronation, he's anointed king, which is actually what Christ means, is anointed. So the new Israelite king, in this case, David or whoever it was after him, became God's son when he was anointed king at the coronation. And then in Acts and Romans, Paul says that Jesus Christ is, which Christ again means anointed, became God's son after his resurrection. That's in, you see those two citations there, Acts and Romans. But I think this is becoming his after his resurrection is early Paul, I guess, because later on in other places, at least in Pauline belief, Jesus Christ becomes God's son from the beginning, not at his resurrection. So again, in Pauline belief, the belief in who Jesus was, that point of becoming God's son keeps moving back in time. First, his resurrection. Well, of course, the Petrines believed that beginning at his baptism. The Ebionites added this phrase, "Today I've begotten you," because they thought this Christ Spirit possessed Jesus at his baptism. So they have it at his baptism, and then Paulines keep moving it. He's at the beginning in creation, or preceding the creation, I guess you'd say. I think Arius and Athanasius argued on that point of Jesus was God sometime after God the Father, but before the creation. And Athanasius said, no, it was at the very beginning with God. He was, I don't know, that part gets kind of tricky for me. But then in this Hebrews, the Paulines are arguing against this at his baptism becoming God's son, because they have they ask for to what angel did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? So they don't think it's some angelic power, that Jesus was an angelic spirit that possessed Jesus at his baptism. This is just a nativity scene, but there are a couple other verses I thought of, and which we commonly use at Christmas, which kind of support a belief in the incarnation. I think we already talked about the first one, the virgin birth belief, but the baby's called Emmanuel, God with us. And then the other one is along with that is in Isaiah 9th chapter. And there's several titles given him. Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the endless peace, which sounds like the Messianic age has arrived, I guess you'd say. So, the Messiah is on the throne.
Shall we sing it? We should sing that.
Go ahead, Jane.
That was my favorite song in the Messiah, I have to say.
I'm waiting.
No. It's in my head. That's good enough.
Over unto us a child is given.
Born,
That's about all I can do.
a son is given.
Unto us.
A son is given.
On and on from there.
I don't know if you on Zoom can hear that, but they're trying to sing that.
We're
We're
whispering it
singing the Messiah badly.
badly
Very softly too.
and softly. Yeah, we're ashamed of our voices. Beautiful though.
So, okay, I kind of breezed through all that. But what do you think of these verses in Psalms and Isaiah? If you were trying to prove this belief in the incarnation, do you think these verses are sufficient to support the Paulines' belief in incarnation? Why or why not? We're going to get through this very quickly, I think.
No, I think the verses in Psalms for me are kind of insufficient. The Psalms that David wrote, saying or whatever, weren't really prophesying. They were entreaties to God, praising, asking protection, guidance, that sort of thing. So I don't really look to find anything. That's me.
Do you think they were practicing, the Paulines were practicing what they called midrash, where they take a verse that was really intended to talk about something else, and then they say, this works for us, so let's use it.
Wasn't that what all read? Find the
Exactly.
verses that work only for you.
I think that's the one thing that in Paul's argument that might have spoken to the Jerusalem church was that he was using the Old Testament to support his position. And that, they might have had some respect for that.
No.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that they were Old Testament scholars, so it would make sense that they would go back to the Hebrew text, and then it gets translated into Greek, and then somebody's speaking Aramaic too. So we've got like 3 languages going on back then. So they're all trying to interpret it the way we're still trying to interpret it today. So it doesn't surprise me that they would go back and try to find in the Old Testament, like Isaiah. Isaiah to me is the one that is more prophetic, just because of the traditions that I grew up with too. I mean, that song, "For unto us a child is born," that's Jesus. I don't know anybody else who it could be. So I would say that's the one that is more proof in my mind. But I do think that they worked hard as scholars to find verses that would prove it. They were lawyers after all. They were all advocates,
So
scribes.
you think Isaiah was talking about Jesus, not somebody in his time?
I do. I mean, I know I do because of it's 2022. I know it's now in my head because of that, but I don't know if Isaiah meant it that way.
Well, the Jews would say that he wasn't talking about Jesus.
That's true. Who was he talking about then?
A young child in his age, in his time. That's one of their arguments, is that this had to occur shortly after he made that there was a time frame, because there's a certain king that was on the throne at the time. It was going to happen during his reign. That's Jewish.
So did Isaiah think this young child was going to become the Messiah?
I think there's some sense of that. This is 700 years before Christ that Isaiah was writing. And that was probably Isaiah's concept about Messiah. They were looking for somebody to rule over Israel and be a righteous king. And then, of course, that evolved a lot in 700 years until when the Christians came on the scene and substituted Jesus for the symbolic person that Isaiah was talking about.
Well, and there were other individuals. I don't remember the name of the individual in the 70 AD uprising that they were called messiahs that they anticipated would be a ruler and redeem Israel. So I mean, there have been other people during the course of Jewish history that they have assumed would be the Messiah and ended up not being someone who would bring their nation to prominence.
I want to know how that verse about the endless peace is working for him.
Yeah.
Well, that was, I think, Arlene, part of the concept of what this king was going to do that Isaiah was talking about, was that there would be eternal peace then for Israel, because they would be a great kingdom whom nobody could conquer because God was on their side. And of course, all that changed in 586 when the Babylonians conquered Israel. First the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, and hauled them away. And then it was, during that period when they were in Babylon that many, if not all of the Psalms were written. And so they had reformed their idea of what this Son of God or Lord was going to look like, I believe.
Of course, that argument can go both ways. I mean, after Jesus came, did we have peace?
Well, he said I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword.
Okay,
I would say we got what we expected.
so we're still looking for the Messiah to bring peace. I guess we're saying Christians would say it's at Jesus' second coming that will occur.
I was really struck in this chapter how Goulder is talking about, that these New Testament writers were scholars and that they were looking at the Old Testament to prove their point. Because I think that's what religion still does. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what we've done for centuries. They proved slavery was from
Okay,
God.
yeah.
I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, I can stand up and make a closing argument on certain verses from the Bible, and then somebody opposite me can say, the difficult part is that you've got to figure out for yourself what you believe. And so in my mind, Isaiah speaks more, it just kind of resounds more in my heart, perhaps, maybe because of the Messiah. Maybe it's Handel that did it to me. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's Handel
I think it's Handel.
that solidified your
Kind of, yeah, maybe, and that's weird too. But what do you do?
Well, and obviously, we don't believe the part where Paul wrote them to keep silent in the church.
I know that did not go well.
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, we say that was pseudo Paul. That wasn't the authentic Paul.
Well, I remember sitting at the auditorium the day that prophecy came out, and I had a lady right behind me quote Paul to me, and I'm just like, what? She was very upset that we were going that direction. So
Did you say to her, you should keep quiet then?
no, I was 20 at the time. I stayed quiet.
Well, does it seem like a little bit? I mean, I'm not a proof texter, but if you want to use proof text, hang your a belief like the Incarnation. I've only got 4 verses here. If anybody got any more, it seems like there'd be.
Well, and remember, we've got this problem that Paul never spoke of the virgin birth, and so after I read this chapter, I went back and did the Google thing and asked other scholars, why didn't Paul mention the virgin birth? And there's all kinds of arguments about that. Well, one scholar said, well, he didn't because everybody knew that.
Oh,
So the other,
I'm thinking,
I don't
really?
think so.
so the other argument on the other side would be, was he didn't know.
Exactly. But at the end was you can't prove it either way,
Yeah.
which is probably true.
Well, I do think it's interesting the early verse in this chapter. Let me find out what psalm it is. Psalm 110, where it says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. It does make some sense that if David is writing this, he's not going to refer to himself as my Lord. And
But he could have been referring to some of the throne.
that's true. Well, that's Goulder's point, is that he was referring to the king sitting at the right hand of the Holy of Holies in the temple.
Didn't David write some of these songs when he was king?
Yes.
Okay, so that's
And I
I don't know which one or they're in the correct order.
yeah,
it
and I don't
is.
have my interpreter's Bible with me to know if that one is claimed to be actually by David or not.
Your interpreter's Bible. You
Yeah.
found somebody who interpreted the
Yes,
Bible
of course.
correctly.
And of course, I believe every word that they say.
Who is the interpreter?
Nowadays,
So
his
I have
name
no
is
response.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. Did Wikipedia agree? I know. I do love Wikipedia.
Well, of course, in Mark, go back to Mark, Mark has Jesus asking that question. Well, how could David be, referring to his son as, or his descendant as his Lord. That they put that argument right
Yeah.
into Jesus' mouth, is Jesus asking the question.
Yeah,
Well,
I
he
like
could
that.
if he believed that Jesus was the Lord. He could do that. I mean, it's
Say
not
it again.
mutually exclusive, but, you know, if David believed that, you know, Jesus was going to be, you know, God's
Oh, yeah.
son, that you couldn't call him my Lord.
Well, okay.
Just not traditional.
Well, what I find interesting is out of Acts, and Goulder mentions this, the author of Acts, which we assume is Luke,
Yeah.
and he's a great compromiser, and he puts words in Peter's mouth, which basically says, men and brethren, I may say frankly to you about the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, for David did not go up to heaven, but he himself says, the Lord shall be my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemy footstool for your feet. So he's basically saying David didn't go to heaven.
yeah, they're
There was
correcting.
no
they're-
resurrection, that there was only, the first resurrection was Jesus.
Yeah, so they're correcting the misconception that David was the one that
Right.
was sitting on the right
Right.
side, because at least what Goulder is trying to tell us is that the messianic, Jerusalem Christians at the time were saying that Christ wasn't anointed, or whatever word, until the baptism.
Yeah.
And so this is proving from the Pauline standpoint that it could only be Jesus, because Jesus was resurrected.
And was,
And then, like you said, then the timeline keeps going back further and further, and he was the Son of God. I don't know, it is
Why
confusing.
did David not go to heaven? Was he going to be one of those eternal spirits?
well, it's not that he wouldn't go to heaven, it's that if you believe that Jesus is first to be resurrected, the first fruits of resurrection, and nobody was resurrected prior. So nobody else would be in heaven. They'd be
Somewhere else.
paradise awaiting the final trumpet call.
Except Lazarus, Jonathan, was resurrected before Jesus.
But he also died again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he was resurrected.
So we're talking about going to heaven.
Oh, okay. Well, presumably, wasn't that where Lazarus would be for 3 days? Or was he just hanging around waiting to be resurrected? I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that one.
Ghost of
Paradise,
Mrs. Muir.
Now things get complicated. Now you start having to explain this and explain
Well,
that. Where are people in
But
between?
Jesus on the cross says to the two thieves, this day I'll meet you in paradise.
That's true.
Only
Oh, to one of them.
of them.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, the other
I
one was,
doubled the
the
population
other one
of
was
paradise.
done with, yeah.
This is a good lesson in why the Orthodox Church decided on a set dogma after a couple hundred years of these kinds of arguments. And so we're just not going to talk about this anymore. This is the way it is, because when you find some new interpretation of Scripture, then it brings into a lot of other things into question that have to be dealt with. And you end up chasing your tail, kind of going in circles, trying to figure out how to explain it all.
It is a lot easier when you're a kid and you learn that Jesus loves me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Maybe
Well-
you're best off to stay at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Just have that concept
Let's just
and
go
not
with
all
that
these other complicated.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of my wife often talks about how she was raised Catholic, went through catechism, was baptized Catholic, all that sort of. And they were never encouraged to read the Bible. In fact, they were discouraged. The interpretation came from the priest, and so they were not to go back to the Bible, which ties in with what Paul said.
Was that true for you, Alec?
I don't know. I would just say there wasn't a focus on it.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it wasn't read or. I would say it wasn't focused on it.
Well, I think it's also churches become more liberal. We're
You're
talking
younger.
probably a little before
It
your
probably
time.
depends on your church.
Yeah.
I don't even think our early church encouraged us to read the scriptures like we're reading it now. I mean, my sister, who's now a Baptist, often says to me, Baptists know their Bible, Jane.
Yeah.
We never learned it the way they learned it, which is true. You know, I mean,
We
they
were too
study
hung
it
up
word for word. We
We-
study stories.
And we were too hung up on the Book of Mormon.
That's right. That we had 3 books to read, so it was a little trickier.
Yeah.
You
There
know, we
wasn't
had
very
the
much
fullness
time.
of the gospel. I'm putting in quotes.
Okay, so, but they know their Bible. The question is, do they interpret or understand it?
Well,
Uh,
you gave me an article that there was it was a, you know, I think it was evangelical had written an article that this whole possessionist theory, it's still heresy today. It was heresy then when they were arguing about it, and now, you know, people are bringing it up again. And this guy was saying, well, it was heresy then, it's heresy now. And so I thought, well, that's what they do. You know, I mean, you find an interpretation and you stick with it. That seems to be what the churches are doing now. You know, except for maybe us. Except we tend to confuse each other.
Well, maybe what we indoctrinate our members with is that there can be multiple interpretations.
Joseph Smith taught us that, if
Yeah.
anybody did.
So, I mean, we just have a different slant on what we're indoctrinated on. We don't like that word, but
And I believe it's okay to question. I don't think God is up there saying, no, Jane, you have it wrong. You know? Maybe I got some of it right, maybe I got some of it wrong. That's how I look at it.
Okay, I didn't hear anybody chime in with some other verses that they could add to the 4 I had.
No, I don't think so. And I think there's been a whole lot of theology fun out of not hearing that.
Yeah.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be a lot in the Old Testament that strongly support. Maybe there doesn't have to be a lot. I don't know. But two verses in Psalms which I question. Isaiah is better. But not very much in the totality. Wow.
But the Old Testament has a lot of the same teachings that Jesus espoused too, as far as the golden rule and you know, the that God's taking care of you, and, you know, the birds and the feathers and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That, you know, even though they're different, there's a lot of the Old Testament in the New Testament.
Well, right, because like Amy Jill Levine likes to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. She calls some of those extensions, not I'm blank, not antithesis. She likes the word extensions because Jesus expands or amplifies an Old Testament scripture or teaching. He doesn't make it, he makes it in a lot of cases more rigorous to the less. So
Because Jesus was a Old Testament scholar too, you know, and so I think that's what Amy Jill Levine is teaching us, is that he was talking to the first century Jewish people and trying to give them perhaps a new interpretation of what they had already been learning, you know.
And, you know, our ancestors would not be able to anticipate what we live with now, like airplanes and that kind of stuff. And just like in the Bible, there's a lot of things and a lot of things that have happened over the years that changes our understanding, that our ancestors would not have had any access to. So, you know, there's that too, that times change. And so some of the stuff we still concentrate on, other stuff doesn't seem like it's appropriate anymore because the times have changed.
right.
well, one of the things that's happened is, you know, discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the Gnostic Gospels. I mean, we, growing up in the 1950s, I didn't know that there were other scriptures besides the Bible.
Right.
And so our understandings have expanded because we have all this additional literature that we never knew of as children that existed.
I just had a thought. What if Jesus comes back and now he knows about the New Testament? He says, "You have heard it said," and then he quotes something in the New Testament, but I say unto you, and then
Wow.
what would his version be of what's in the New Testament? That would be interesting.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, like you said, I like to think of the how do you pronounce it?
Nagamati,
Nagamati.
Nagamati.
That was found in 1945. And that's where the Gospel of Thomas is. And that's kind of the one I'm fascinated with, because it's the most like the synoptic gospels. And you know, scholars are saying there is a Q, because there's a big argument whether there's this Q sayings, you know, but it's just so interesting that Matthew and Luke use the same, you know, that you can tell that they used Mark as a source. So everybody agrees that Mark was written before them. But then they also have this unknown source, you know, and so then when they found the book of Thomas, it was just a book of sayings. And it was also similar to Matthew and Luke. All of a sudden, we've kind of got this Jesus's sayings thing that so many of these witnesses, that to me, especially as a lawyer, I think the more witnesses who say it, the more true it is. You know, I mean, if everybody kind of agrees on a story, you can get to the truth. That's how I look at witnesses. And so this is like 4. A lot. So that's why the sayings are more important to me.
Well, and generally, it's understood that the writings of Mark, Matthew, and Luke are all based on sayings, whether there actually was a cue or not, but they're based on
Yeah.
an
These
oral
parables,
history of
right.
what
Exactly.
Christ and Jesus' life was.
Yeah.
And we know how oral history can change just around the room.
Yeah. So when they agree is when you kind of start paying attention.
And we got to realize that technology is continuing to develop, and they have recently come up with a way to read scrolls without opening them up.
Right, that was interesting.
So, you know, they're possibly going to be able to use technology to get more out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the other day they were talking about a brand new, or a new bunch of mummies that they dug up in Egypt. And one of them had all sorts of scrolls in the coffin with him, and they're actually readable. And so, you know, if they use stuff like that, technology like that, you know, we don't know what's still out
Right.
there.
So if you open it, it's
They disintegrate.
It can be
Oh,
so
they
fragile.
disintegrate.
They're real brittle.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
But this
Interesting.
technology allows them to
Read
Scan
in
it
that.
somehow,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know what
to
it is.
pick it out by
And then
layers,
they
and they
can
can,
unroll it on the computer.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
understand
just-
any of it.
yeah.
Well, anyway, we
How
better.
anybody thought it up. Just
Yeah.
amazing.
I have some more questions. So
Okay.
Um,
Ask
the
another question.
Paulines
Sorry.
and the Petrines could be at one in the reverence for Jesus Christ, but they had differences on who he was. And we've discussed those over the last several chapters. And that's kind of the core issue between the two. I mean, they had arguments about circumcision and food and purity and all these other, but those are sort of minor issues compared to the core issue of who is Jesus. And they didn't have the same conclusion. So here's some questions for you.
Interesting.
What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of incarnation theology? And if you want to contrast that with possession, or you want to talk about one and the other.
Well,
Tricky.
I think that sometimes when people are so worried about proving anything, I feel like people get so hung up on his death and resurrection, they never talk about anything. They never espouse anything. They forget that he gave a sermon on it. They forget that he taught in parables. And there's all this other, what he said and taught, to me, is really the core.
Right.
And I don't know, sometimes can't get him off the cross to study what he was trying to teach us.
I agree. Sometimes we get so involved in the nitpicky stuff that you miss the whole course. Yeah.
Well, one of the big weaknesses of incarnation theology for me is explaining it. How do you explain this person is fully divine and fully human? If he's fully divine, how can he have any human weaknesses or being susceptible to temptation? If he's fully human, then, I just can't, some people leave it as a mystery. I guess I don't leave it. I don't see how this works. So explaining it is to me, I've got a book about talking about that. They said, there's been a whole bunch of theologians that have put up various explanations, but they all eventually they get rejected as heresies. They've tried this approach to explain, well, sometimes, I don't know, I without trying to get into all of it, they just can't explain it that in an acceptable way. They all get rejected.
Well, I think the problem is the word fully, because I've always believed that, Christ was divine from his birth, but that didn't mean he was exactly perfect, until he was born again in the waters of baptism. He may not have done evil stuff. He may have done good stuff, but he was still trying to be human so that we would have an example. And
You could have a hybrid.
Huh?
You believe in both.
yeah, kind of. I believe that he was good, based even from the time, he was 12 and he was teaching the rabbis in the synagogue. So that he had it in him, but he didn't spend every minute of his childhood and his youth doing the Lord's work. It wasn't until he was baptized that he really became, started into his ministry. So he had years that he was growing, and maybe he didn't do any stealing or any of the stuff that people do, but he was born again in the waters of baptism.
I think there's a danger in any kind of theology, Dennis, whether it's possession theology or incarnation theology. And, you develop a theology, a set of beliefs in the 1st century AD, and then people come along in 2022 and they feel boxed in by those beliefs, and their experience of God and their experience of the world and the universe has been very different than those early people's. And if you feel compelled to stay inside the box, it's an uncomfortable place for some people to be. And so I think theology is good from the standpoint that it gets us talking and it gets us sharing and understanding each other's point of view. But I think it's dangerous to worship theology. And each person, I think, has to take a little bit of theology and then explore, what God means to them in their life in their own way. Otherwise, that's why we lose people. That's why I think, have lost a lot of young people, because we've tried to box them in with theology from 1830 that, quite frankly, didn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see incarnation theology as any better or worse than possession theology. They're just two ways that people experienced Jesus in the 1st century, and I'm okay with talking about it.
You want to talk about any of these other questions?
I have to read them first. Hold on.
Well, well, I'll just let you read the questions. Does anybody else have any comments about the first two?
I I was just kind of wondering, why did our incarnation theology win out? You know, I mean, what was so strong about what Paul was saying? Why did they need it to be true over possession? I'm kind of like,
They needed it because the Gentiles need to be saved, so he had to be incarnated for them to
Paul was
be
speaking to
saved.
the Gentiles, and the Gentiles needed a way to be saved, and this was their way to be saved.
Well, that was Goulder's argument.
Okay, that makes okay.
And if you take that, then because of the Jewish war and their dispersal from Jerusalem, and the success of the Pauline Gentiles, their growth, one became greater and one became lesser.
But I think there's always been the need for humans to try to understand why good things happen, why bad things happen, why we're here, what created this place we live in. And I think in ancient times there was often multiple gods. The Jews evolved to a point where they thought there was one God. And so I think there's always been maybe a feeling that whoever delivered the message from God had to be of God, had to be part God. And so I think incarnation is kind of a natural thing. My heresy is I believe there's God. I believe he created all of us. I believe that Jesus was inspired by that God and shared a message that we all need. And I think his teachings are more important. I'm not terribly concerned about whether he possessed by this Christ spirit or if he was the Messiah. I'm more concerned that his message is still appropriate for us today, still important for us today, and that one way or another, he was inspired and sent, by God.
Okay, so that would be some scriptures that support Jesus as a person who grew spiritually until they were filled with the Spirit of God, had a spiritual transformation. Here's some scriptures that kind of, I think, would support that belief. Look at Luke, 2nd chapter. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. That kind of leads that.
You can feel it, can't you? It's like in the air.
Then there's Luke 2. Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. And then you got Luke 4.
You're good. Good morning. Good morning. Hi there. How are you? Good morning. Russ, how are you, my friend?
Good.
Good seeing you, sir.
I'm looking for.
Oh, they're early.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, you muted him.
And then in Luke 4, Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan, was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And then this is one that I was always kind of puzzled over, is in John. Jesus says, I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. Which,
Yeah, that was interesting. That one.
those all
Can
speak.
you repeat that one again?
John 14, verse 12. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. Those kind of
That's the
support.
Great Commission,
Those kind of support to me a belief of Jesus, the Spirit working within him until he undergoes a spiritual transformation, where he can eventually feel that he can speak for God because he feels like he's at one with God. Me, that's close to, not the same as, but it's close to what I think. Eastern Orthodox, they have a view of deification. This isn't exactly that, but that's.
Hey, Dennis,
So-
can I offer one more observation about Paul himself? when it comes to, how did we end up with this as opposed to something else in
Yeah,
our,
Apostle Paul, go ahead.
the Apostle Paul, not me.
Yeah,
I think he was, I think, a very strong personality. It's pretty obvious that he didn't back down very easily in these arguments. And he was probably very intelligent. He certainly was well-read. He was a Pharisee and had been educated probably beyond what many of the people, these fishermen in the early Jerusalem church would not have been close, in terms of what he knew or what he had learned over time. Plus, he was part Roman, and so he had sort of this cosmopolitan, this exposure to the rest of the world that the people in the Jerusalem church who had not likely been as exposed to that as he was. And, he was the first one to leave writings behind. He explored all of this. He developed these theological positions, and then he wrote about them long before Mark or Matthew or anybody else wrote. So I think, when you're first, if you're the first one to consider this, and then you leave a very solid written record about it behind, it's probably going to be a big influence for a long, long time. That's just, I kind of was thinking about that.
Well, another point I just thought about is that Peter stayed a little more in Jerusalem, right? And Paul was spreading his in various different areas. So maybe that had some to do with why his won out, because more people were exposed to it than just around Jerusalem.
Right.
and if he's speaking to the Gentiles, I keep thinking that the Gentiles at that time were these people who believed in multiple gods. And then the Caesar was always the God, I mean, Caesar kind of meant, I don't think it meant anointed one, but it's interesting to me that Christ means anointed one, and they were replacing the Caesars with Christ, and it wasn't until Constantine in 300 and something decided to believe in Christianity on his deathbed, because he wanted to be, he wanted everybody, I mean, there was such a war going on that I think of him as saying, okay, fine, I'm the sun god, and let's go ahead and believe in Christianity,
It
so
covered his base.
yeah.
Okay, this isn't in the book, so this is free range, I guess you'd say. Eventually, the Pauline theology, incarnation theology, won out over possession theology. But what have been some adverse consequences of incarnation theology over time? And I'll throw out one. Maybe this get you started thinking. I have three, but one of them is anti-Semitism.
Okay.
And the thought that we've got people talking.
I'm just gonna.
So we have.
Oh, that's a good idea, because if they can't hear something.
Remember Amy Jill Levine telling the story that when she was a little girl, this other little Christian girl told her, "You killed my Jesus." And although it isn't a requirement of Christianity, didn't have to work out that way. During Christianity, when it became the state religion of Rome, anti-Semitism escalated because of this belief of, which is kind of promoted in John, that the Jews were responsible for Jesus' death, even though it was the Romans that executed him. So there's kind of one adverse consequence.
I think another adverse one is what we've been talking about this morning. It's very difficult to explain. It, as the world becomes more and more scientific, it's more and more difficult to explain. I do always refer back or think back of Norm Bernauer's response to how big is your God?
Yeah.
In other words, isn't God capable of doing anything he can do at any time in history? But it is more difficult to explain the merging of a human and a God in our time. And it's also more difficult to figure out the genealogy of Christ back to David, since he was not of the house of Joseph, not Joseph's progeny, he was the Holy Spirit and Mary. So I mean, there are some difficulties all the way along that we still haven't figured out how to resolve. And so some of us choose to ignore the difficulties.
So does that, so that's kind of an anti-scientific basis or belief or bias?
Yes.
Well, and people still, struggle with the virgin birth.
Well, and I agree with what Sharon said earlier, that we get so caught up in improving the incarnation theology, and even to this day, that you have forgotten what Jesus was really trying to teach when he was here. So that's why I'm comfortable relying on the parables and Jesus's life stories, in terms of the lessons for my life, because I think that's what he was here to do.
And we're supposed to take as much on faith.
Yeah.
I'll throw out another one, and we're about out of time here. So, because Jesus was born male, I mean, that's the way it was. His maleness has been used as a justification in the church, Christianity, for to argue against the ordination of women. Basically, and this hasn't been settled by any means. So there's major branches of Christianity that hold that women can't be ordained because God the Son that came incarnate as a male, and they not a female, and therefore only males can be God's representatives. Mary Daly, she's a feminist, you may remember her, said, when God is male, male is God.
Well, isn't that the truth?
So that's been kind of an adverse consequence of, and it doesn't have to be that way really in Christianity, because Jesus was very respectful and validating of women.
But remember, they were wiping out the goddesses during that time. So it's all about wiping out the goddesses.
Well, I thought that was before his time, but
Well, there were still some goddesses around in the Roman culture.
well, in the Roman culture, yes. I would think in Judaism, I was thinking more in the
Oh,
time
no,
of,
I'm talking about the Gentiles.
Yeah.
They're still
okay.
wiping them out, I think, in Jesus' time.
Well, on to chapter 21, the Son of Man, which is another concept of who Jesus is. So there's several we talked about, Jesus is God incarnate, Jesus, this figure that's rather mysterious, the Son of Man. Who's teaching next week?
Me.
Hey, and Dennis, one other thing, that third Psalm that you said Goulder didn't talk about in this chapter is in the next chapter. It's Psalm 8.
Oh, okay.
So he comes back around to it.
Okay, that's why I couldn't find it in this chapter.
That's why I couldn't find it in this chapter.
It's in the next one. I should have looked ahead.
You didn't? I was going to say, Dennis always looks ahead.